Join us in the Bear Den, a real-life, real-love podcast celebrating the joys and challenges of parenting, family dynamics, and unconditional love.
Welcome to another fantastic episode of the Bear Den podcast. I am very excited to introduce today's guest. He's one of my best friends. He is a world-renowned plastic surgeon. He is here in Salt Lake City. And like I said, he's a great man, a great father, and an even better friend. It is Dr. Nicholas Howland. How are you, my friend?
Rawr. Bear Den.
Yes, exactly. Coming out all grizzly.
That's my bear crawl call. Is it bear enough?
It's just bear enough. If you could bear a little more, that'd be great.
A lot of cat in my bear call.
Yes, you're definitely a cat guy. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, dude. I'm so happy for you. This is such a fun thing to see you jumping onto and tackling.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me your inspiration for this, and I have been so excited. So seeing this come to fruition is a treat.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, I appreciate that. And we actually wanted to get you on last round, but you were too busy getting your hair cut, so you couldn't make it. So unfortunately, you've been bumped down the list because of those beautiful flowing locks of yours.
Thank you for throwing me under the bus there.
Hey, that's what friends do. So I want to dive right in. I generally start every podcast talking about my guests' childhood and who they were as a kid and what was their childhood like. So let's lean into Little Nick, which is not the first time you've heard that, but let's talk about Little Nick. And what was your childhood like?
That was great. I've blocked most of this out.
Yeah, like, oh God, we're going there again already?
No, I honestly, I had a good childhood growing up. I haven't always felt that way. But as I've kind of healed a lot of stuff with myself, I've realized that I had a really pretty damn good childhood. I grew up mostly all of my life in Murray, Utah. There was a small stint where we lived in Texas for a few years as I was young, but I mean, I've been in Murray since I was in kindergarten.
Okay.
My parents are both active LDS church members. I was raised that way, baptized when I was 8 years old. And I stayed in Murray all my life, went to elementary school at McMillan Elementary. My mom still lives in that house where I grew up.
Oh, wow.
Met one of my very best friends in life, Jimmy Rex, in 6th grade. And we became very close in 6th grade, went to junior high school together, and then went on to high school together. In high school, I guess I was hit by my first big trauma in life, if you want to call it a trauma, but my parents went through a divorce. And that was right around the time I was 15, 16 years old. And divorce at 15, 16, especially in the 90s, felt really, really big. And it felt like a big change, and I felt very, very different. Even though, statistically speaking, I know probably half the kids in my high school were dealing with the same thing.
Yeah.
But it felt very important to me.
What felt different to you?
Just having that kind of a significant change in your life feels hard.
Okay.
And my parents had 6 kids. There's a girl at each end. So I have an older sister, and there's 4 boys in the middle. I'm the oldest son. And so even though I have an older sister, I've always felt like the, not the oldest in the family, but definitely like kind of the leader. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm the one who's all of my brothers follow my example. And I've got a sister who I look up to dearly, who I love, but I also, since she's a sister, feel very protective. Mm-hmm. Like I just think as a man and as a brother, you feel protective of your sisters. And finished high school, did not think I was going to serve an LDS church mission, but ended up serving an LDS church mission, and came back from that. And I served in Russia from 2001 to 2003, came back from that, and that's the childhood.
Yeah.
Where do you want to dig into?
Well, so obviously growing up, your parents divorcing when you were 15, you obviously lived 15 years of seeing a established home with both parents and, multiple siblings. When your parents divorced, were you drawn to lean one way or the other towards a parent versus, kind of splitting yourself down the middle, 50% mom, 50% dad? Were you drawn either one way or the other towards a parent?
We didn't have an option.
Okay.
It was all mom.
Really?
And my dad has always been a very, very hard worker and very good at what he does. He grew up also in Utah. And when my parents were married, his job, as I always understood it, was he was a financial planner for years. He worked for a company called Clark Financial, and this is when we were in Texas. There's a guy named Sam Walton. Sam Walton is the owner of Walmart.
Okay.
At the time, one of the richest men in the world.
He's the wall from Walmart?
He is the wall from Walmart. Exactly. It's his damn brand. So Sam Walton established Walmart, and I think it was either late 80s, early 90s, he wanted to divvy his estate up amongst his children. And my dad was part of the team of financial advisors that helped divvy up Sam Walton's estate.
Oh, wow.
And so this was a big, big client, obviously, and a big deal for him. After that went down, he decided to leave this firm of Clark Financial and establish his own kind of financial planning company. And the way he did it was very, very bright. He took a lot of his clients who he was financial planning for. Most of them were physicians. And he started dabbling in real estate. And he would approach his clients and say, hey, I've got a real estate deal that we're going to invest in, and I can guarantee you X percentage of your money back on this investment. And so his financial planning for them became not just like, hey, let's put your money in stocks and bonds, and here's what you do to ensure a future. It was, here's an actual deal that I'm going to create and structure and happen and give you a solid return on your investment. And so he, from there, turned that into a very successful commercial real estate business. And as the oldest son, that's what I was always supposed to go in and do. Mm-hmm. When they were divorced, my dad and I did not have a good relationship.
Did that stem from the divorce, or was that prior to leading up to the divorce?
Prior to, we were just never really super close.
Okay.
And we, at that point in our lives, had just never really connected. And when my parents divorced, I think I put a lot of blame for their divorce on him. And I became my mom's protector at that time. I have a very vivid memory of right around the time they were divorced of kicking him out of the house.
Wow.
And so I've, for a good 2 years, did not have a strong relationship with him. And that changed significantly when I went and served a church mission. When I served, we were allowed to write home once a week. We could go to an internet cafe and we could write home once a week from an email account. And we could check emails that had come in as well. And my dad was the only one who wrote me every week.
Really?
Even my mom missed some weeks here and there. But my dad, when I left on my mission, we still did not have a great relationship, but he was the only person who wrote me every single week. And I had a life-changing experience on my mission where I was up in the morning, I was doing some study, and I had this realization that God doesn't ask anything of us other than to just do our best. Mm-hmm. And I thought, if God only wants us to do our best, who actually knows that whether or not we're doing our best? The only people who really know that are us and God. And the problem with that requirement is my best is very different from your best. And my best is very different from my dad's best. And my best was very different from, say, I was comparing myself to like the prophet of the church at the time. Like his best is way good.
Yeah.
Mine is not. But if I'm not doing if I was doing my best and it was falling short of somebody else, that doesn't matter. And so we're not comparing apples to apples and sin to sin and right for right. We're comparing best or not your best.
Yeah.
And if nobody really knows, then who are we to judge any single person? And I had this realization while I'm sitting there studying one morning, and I just thought, holy shit, what if my dad's just doing his best?
Yeah.
Like what if the best he could do was sometimes being unfaithful to my mom, sometimes not coming to a soccer game, sometimes not being the dad that I thought he should be? If that was his very best, that's all that was asked of him.
Yeah.
And it's not a free pass, right? It's not a carte blanche and no consequences. But it also was the first time that I realized, I can let go of all of this shit. And if I just assume he's doing the very best that he can, then I can love him where he's at. And I don't have to hold any of this stuff against him. Mm-hmm. And so that became a really healing moment for me in my relationship with my dad, where I just started assuming he was doing the best he could. Mm-hmm. And I try to look at most people in life that way. I just assume they're doing the best they can. And it sure makes it a lot easier to love people that way.
Yeah. Well, and I love what you said there, that who is to write the metrics of what best is.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's so many different walks of life that my best is different to your best, is different to the best that we think that God expects of us or parents expect of us, like as long as you're doing your best, right? Yeah. And there's no metric for what is best.
Here's a question I'll pose to you. Yeah. And this is, I used to teach 13, 14-year-olds in Sunday school when I was allowed to be in religion.
We're not going down that road on this podcast.
So here's a question I would pose to the class, okay? I would say very simply, okay, there's a guy that comes to heaven, or comes to the pearly gates, whatever. He has murdered 3 people in his life. He did it, 100% evidence. There's no question of it. This guy murdered 3 people in his life. Is he going to heaven or hell?
Wow. That's a really difficult question to answer.
Most of those kids, what do you think most of those kids say?
Go to hell.
Going to hell. And I say, okay, I think we can all agree this guy did some very bad things. He's going to hell. I'm going to throw a little wrench in there. This guy's mentally handicapped. Mm. He's Down syndrome, whatever. He doesn't know the difference between right and wrong.
Yeah.
What now?
Yeah.
And most of these kids, especially in the LDS faith, were taught from a very young age that mentally handicapped kids and people who can't tell the difference between right and wrong, like that's not going to be held against them. They've got a carte blanche to go to heaven no matter what. Mm-hmm. And it's, for me, just a beautiful thought lesson of like, you don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know what somebody's best is because you don't know what their struggles are, what their mindset is, what their capabilities are. Mm-hmm. And so even something as black and white as murder can actually have some underlying twists to it if you know more about the whole story.
Yeah. Well, as you were saying that, I was thinking, well, depends who he murdered.
Sure.
What if he murdered 3 people that murdered members of his family? It's eye for an eye. Let him in. He's just corrected a wrong. You don't, like you said, you don't know the full story, the mental health, the struggles, the issues, the situation.
Yeah.
once your parents divorced, did your mom and dad still have a relationship, a mutually agreed relationship, or?
Yes, my parents, like, for whatever reason, to both of their credit, maintained a pretty significant relationship. We would still vacation together.
Oh, wow.
We would still see. They didn't have a typical custody arrangement. Like, there was never really a time when I was like, oh, I got to go to dad's this weekend, or it was kind of just like parents were divorced. I lived with mom, but I would still see dad on a pretty regular basis, and dad was still like, we would go on these family trips together. They just weren't married.
Yeah,
and that was good. I think they were doing the best they could for their kids.
Yeah.
I remember when I went through my own divorce, I remember my ex-wife telling me, we're not going to have a relationship like your parents had. Like, we're not going to travel together and put up this facade. She saw it as kind of a facade, and maybe it was. Mm-hmm. And my ex-wife and I have created what I think is a good communicative relationship. We're not friends who hang out, but we raise our kids together, and it's a relationship that works really well for us.
How did that make you feel when Hillary said that, knowing that your parents did it successfully? Did it disappoint you or upset you, or bring up an emotion of, well, if my parents could do it, we can do it. Why can't we do that?
It's certainly been hard, but I will say this. She saw a lot of truth in there. Mm-hmm. Like, my parents forcing this relationship where they still traveled together was not this perfect thing.
Or potentially healthy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it was unhealthy in a lot of aspects. And so I don't put any animosity towards Hillary on that, where she's just like, we're not going to have that, because it probably would be harder for the kids if Hillary and I were like buddy, or traveling together.
Because Rockwell and Isabel were like, well, if you guys can travel together and be in each other's space, why aren't you together? Why can't you love each other?
For sure.
And be our parents?
For sure.
Yeah. I guess, like you said, there's two sides to every tale, and you don't understand until you look at it the underlying aspects of it. So I guess you can understand Hillary's position on that. And what's your relationship like now with your parents?
With my parents is good. It's funny. I've started to feel a shift to a better relationship with my dad, and a relationship with my mom that needs more work.
What was the shift? What happened to change that dynamic?
I don't know. Putting in time, putting in effort.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had some really great experiences with, in the last couple of years, with friends who have kind of nudged me into repairing the relationship I had with my dad, mm-hmm. that have helped me feel closer to him. Because I've always felt really, really close to my mom. But I'm just in a point now where I'm like, okay, I feel a little unbalanced, and I feel like I want to put in more of that effort with my mom as well.
Yeah.
It's not like there's anything wrong there. It's just a balance thing.
You put more weight into rebuilding the relationship with your dad, which therefore took the balance away from the relationship you had with your mom. You overextended.
Exactly.
Yeah, the scales on that. So you talked about, you touched on, getting married and having children. Before we get to that, I want to talk about you as a professional. You became a doctor, a plastic surgeon. Obviously, that takes a lot of time, a lot of commitment. Were you in that process of being a doctor? And I assume you were when you had Isabel, because Isabel's 16 now?
Yeah, Isabel's 16. So we had Isabel when I was a first-year medical student.
Okay.
Like, I moved to medical school when she was a baby.
Which was in Houston, Texas, correct?
And it was 2007. Rockwell was born in 2011, and I was a first-year resident. So I was an intern. Both really good decisions.
Yeah. On the grand scheme of things, having children while you're away, being a doctor, probably doesn't...
It just made those first years like have a whole other layer of complexity to them. I love that they're here, and I love having them, but it definitely added more challenges to those.
Did Hillary and the kids move
years.
to Texas with you, or did they? They did.
Yeah. So when Isabel was born, we were just finishing up undergraduate here in Utah, and we had been accepted to medical school in Texas, and we moved to Colorado to be with Hillary's family for the summer. And I moved to Houston first. We were building a home in Houston. And what's funny is the home that we built when school started was not finished. And so I moved down because school was starting. I had to be there. And Hillary has this brand new baby, and she's like, I'm not coming down until we've got a house. Yeah. So she stayed at her parents. And for the first 3 months of medical school, I lived in a medical fraternity house. So I was Phi Beta Pi.
Oh, there we go.
For the first 3 months of medical school.
Yeah.
And medical school fraternities are very similar to Greek fraternities in undergrad.
Can I imagine?
Lots of parties. And I just would go back to my little dorm room in this shared house that we had and study while listening to everybody else party. And I'd talk to Hillary, who's at home with our newborn Isabel.
So what's that noise, honey? Nothing, just one of the guys who's playing some music super loud.
This Chinese kid next to me, I can't even remember his name. I just remember he was Chinese. That dude got more action than any guy I have ever known. Every night I was listening to friggin' Chang or whatever his name was. Just go to. I'm not saying that in a racist point. I think his name was Chang. Just go to town next door to me. And so it was a hard first 3 months of medical school, but then our house was finished and Hillary moved down with Isabel, and that's where we started.
Yeah. How I can only assume the difficulties. What strains did that put on the marriage with Hillary, and also being a parent with, I can only assume again is that 100% of your time had to be committed to your studies, your the what you was requested of you and required of you to be a doctor. It must have been incredibly difficult trying to balance being a father, being a husband, and also being a doctor.
Yeah, medical school, I feel like we did medical school pretty well together. We kind of just treated it like a job, where I got up in the morning and I went to class, and then once class was over, I mean class was over at like noon.
Oh, okay.
And there were a lot of dudes who just went home.
Yeah.
And I would go to the library, and I would stay at the library and study till 5 o'clock. And then I would come home, and it was just like I was 9 to 5 job every single day. Some days and some weekends I'd be studying 16 hours a day, but most days through medical school it was just like I was going to work and I was coming home. When it became really, really difficult was when residency started. And residency, we knew going into it, we stayed at the same hospital for residency. So I was at the same place for 10 years. And we knew going into residency that it was going to be long hours. They had just initiated what's called the 8-hour work week, where they were restricting resident physicians from working more than 80 hours in a week. So when I started, that was brand new, which means nobody gave a shit.
Yeah.
The faculty and the staff and everybody were like, well, you lie, because residency is more than 80 hours a week. So if you worked more than that, you just lie.
Yeah.
Since then, it's become more strict. And as I went through residency, more and more residents were like putting their foot down. And like I had people, when I was a 3rd, 4th year resident, my junior resident would look at me and be like, walk out of a case in the middle of a case. I'm like, where the fuck are you going, bro? He's like, I'm over my 80 hours.
80 hours are up, yeah.
And I'm like, we got an open belly here. This is not how medicine works.
God.
And
like, that's unfathomable to think of.
it's a massive disservice to the physicians that we're training now.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other conversation we could
Well,
have.
and to the patients.
Oh yeah. Well, so
Like, I'm open on the table and the whistle blows and you all bugger off.
Well, so the idea behind it was we're just beating residents into the ground. They're working 100+ hours a week and they're too tired. They can't safely take care of patients. And that's true. Like, there are medical errors that occur because residents were overworked. Yeah. However, we swung so far the other way that now you've got physicians who literally are not trained enough and don't know how to handle a patient that they've got to be with for 36 hours.
Yeah.
Because they've never done it. And so there's got to be some wiggle room in the middle, but the hard part was not the hours. The hard part was the inconsistency. So, and that was hard for me and it was hard for Hillary. So I would, for example, I would be done with my day. I would call Hillary at 6 o'clock at night, say, hey, finally finished. I'm on my way home. And she'd be like, great. Kids have been nuts. Can't wait for you to get home. I need some help. I'm so excited. And then some asshole walks into the ER because he cut his hand off and I'm stuck for 8 more hours. Yeah. Well, I don't have a choice. Yeah. And we had a saying that I think both of us hated, but both of us realized the importance of it. And it was, it's not that medicine comes first, or sorry, it's not that you don't come first. It's that sometimes medicine has to come first.
You have a duty of care.
And so there were times when, yeah, I wanted to be with my family and they were the most important thing to me and they always have been. But sometimes you don't get that luxury when you're the one who needs to be saving a life.
Yeah. You got to treat what's in front of you. You can't just walk out. Mm-hmm. I can only, and I know we're kind of veering away from the parenting thing too, but I think it's such an interesting concept of, you know, when you have doctors or residents that are literally clocking out at the 80-hour mark, it's like, okay, well, you know, the night shift's coming in, they'll finish you off.
Yeah,
well, the night shift didn't open me up.
Yeah.
The night shift haven't had their hands inside me for the last 8 hours, and now you're bringing in the B team to finish this off. Like, just stay and get the goddamn job done.
And so now you've got medical errors happening, not because people are tired and overworked, but because there's a lot of things that get lost in translation in a patient handoff.
Yeah, I was going to say in the handover, yeah.
And so there's got to be a balance somewhere in the middle, and I think they're finally working on that and figuring that out. But I was right in the middle of it.
Yeah. So you mentioned getting divorced to Hillary. How old were the children when you got divorced?
So we separated in 2014. I had just over 2 years left of residency training. Okay. And when we separated, Hillary packed the kids up and came to Utah. I have told this story before, and I'm always extremely careful in telling the story because I think when I tell it from the standpoint of, oh yeah, Hillary left to Utah with the kids, it sounds very, very negative towards Hillary. And so I'm very careful to point out, like, that was a decision that we made together.
Okay.
We talked about when I was first served divorce papers, I was angry. And my initial reaction was to fight and bring her and the kids back to Texas. And as we talked about it and talked about what my future plans were and what was best for her, and what was best for the kids, we mutually agreed on her staying in Utah, me finishing out residency, and then me coming to Utah to start practice.
Okay.
And so I'm very careful to let people know, like, this was not a stab Nick in the back, hurt Nick's kids. Mm-hmm. It was a mutual decision.
Yeah.
And I'm protective of Hillary's image, but I'm also protective of my kids and their perception of what that was, because I know that my kids have struggled with that. Isabel was 7-8 years old Rockwell was 3 or 4. And I missed 2 years of their life. 2 really important years of their life. Yeah. I took out a credit card that my mom co-signed on, Southwest credit card. And once a month I would fly home on a Friday night after work, and I would see the kids and would say goodbye on Sunday, and I'd fly back to Houston. And then once a year I would get a 2-week vacation and get to have some extended time with them, but that was about it.
Yeah.
And we did that for 2 years, and every trip, my kids would ask me how many more trips before Dad was home.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the highlights of my life was graduating residency. Not because I had achieved this big reward of finishing a plastic surgery training program or getting on this big mountaintop of what I had achieved, but I got to stand up in front of 100 of my peers and my colleagues, and I got to look at my kids, and I got to say, there's no more trips.
Yeah.
Dad's coming home.
I love that, mate. And what a different emotion, because I can only imagine all your peers were standing up celebrating that I've become a doctor, I've hit the pinnacle of years of training.
Yeah.
And rightly so, you should have had that emotion, because it is no mean feat to go through 10 years of training and all the hardships and whatever you've given up to become what you became. And in your mind, it was the doctor part of me is now second. I get to become a father again. Mm-hmm. That's, and for you to recognize and admit that and openly say that is huge. Mm-hmm. That in that moment of pride was, I'm a doctor, but I get to be a dad again.
Yeah. It's been a journey. There have been times in my life when I have questioned whether I gave up my family for my career. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that I'll ever know the answer to that. Mm-hmm. But I know that the career that I have provides for them the lifestyle that I have always wanted to give them.
Yeah. Could you see that then? Could you see the 30,000-foot view of, okay, we've got divorced and the kids have moved back to Utah with Hillary, and could you see the 30,000-foot view of one day in the future, this will all work out. I will have a beautiful relationship with my kids. Hillary and I will have a relationship of whatever level that will be. This is it's not for the greater good now, but it will be for the greater good down the road. Or were you in the trenches of,
no, this
freaking sucks? And
that's what I saw.
Yeah.
And the opportunity was there to leave, to let it go, to let residency go.
Did you ever think that at the time of giving up residency and making the marriage and the family work? Mm-hmm. Wow.
But the vision of what I could provide was bigger.
Bigger, yeah.
And I think also that comes from not just knowing what the vision was, but also knowing that by that point the relationship was beyond saving. And so I don't think even had I given up residency and left, I don't think that Hillary and I would have salvaged our relationship.
Yeah.
There was a really big moment for me when we were going through the divorce process. I was struggling. Hillary had moved on, and she was getting ready to move in with Alex, who's now her husband, my kid's stepdad. And I was like really struggling. Mm-hmm. And I remember going to a class. They made me go to this divorce class here in Utah. I don't know if that's still the requirement or not. I tell this story to people and they're like, I don't.
Divorce class?
Where did you sign up for this, bro?
Step 1, don't hate your ex. Step 2, don't be an asshole. Like, okay, we're done.
I feel like it was a requirement. And so I go to this divorce class and I'm still struggling. And this guy gets up and he tells a story about his own divorce where he shows up to sign divorce papers. And it's like the worst day of his life. And he's crying walking into the courthouse and he sees his wife and she's got the biggest damn grin on her face and like is going to go off and celebrate. And the realization that hit him was that a relationship goes through a grieving process. And we all have a different length of grieving. And he realized in that moment that his wife had already grieved the relationship. So she was past, she was done, she was moved on, and he just hadn't fully grieved the relationship. And that hit me so hard because it was exactly where I was at. I had an ex-wife who she had grieved the relationship probably years before, because of shit that I was doing, and because of ends that I wasn't meeting and needs that I wasn't fulfilling. And so she went through that and I hadn't figured that out yet. And, by the time I did, it got a lot easier and it got a lot easier to accept a divorce and accept where we were at, in each other's life at that point.
Yeah. I want to touch on something which is important to me, with my situation in my marriage and the way that our circumstances are as a family. And you honestly are one of the best people to ask this question to. Is obviously Andrea and I have Lily and Anna, who are my stepdaughters. They also have their biological father that is still involved in their life. How was it for you as Isabel and Rockwell's biological dad accepting Alex into your life and their life as a father figure?
Hardest thing in the world.
Okay.
Because I tell you,
that's one thing that, for me, I have struggles of being a step parent and sharing the children and them having a biological dad. And I've talked about this in the past, that it was very difficult for me not to be called dad for a certain amount of time.
Sure.
I never, because I was so involved in my own growth as being a father and showing up for the girls, that I never took into consideration the thoughts that their biological dad, Brian, was feeling. Yeah. Especially as Andrea and I's relationship came from an affair. We weren't separated. We both had an affair and came together through that. And so he was betrayed by us. He had a lot of hatred towards me, the guy that ruined their family. And then all of a sudden he had to accept that I'm not going anywhere and we're married and I'm now going to parent your daughters.
Yeah.
And like I said, you're the best person I know to explain how that feels.
Well, now compound that with seeing his own children accept another man as their dad. It's not easy. Yeah. It makes it a lot easier to have some sympathy for him and for his struggles and the things and the challenges that he has. It doesn't excuse them. I know the challenges that he goes through and that he brings to the table for you guys.
Yeah.
But I love that you asked that question, because I love the growth and the strength in you to try and put yourself in his shoes. At the end of the day, the only thing that you can ask for as a divorced parent is that whoever comes into your children's lives is good and that they love your kids. And I am very blessed to know that Alex, their stepdad, is somebody who is good and who loves my kids. and I know that my kids love him. That doesn't make it easy.
Yeah.
I remember a moment when Isabel had a bad day at school, and she was in junior high school, and her stepdad Alex took her up to the mountains and took a bunch of junk with him and a baseball bat. He just let Isabel go to town on some junk up in the mountains. And there was an Instagram post that was put up later, and I don't know if she put it up. I don't know if her mom put it up. Doesn't matter. But there was an Instagram post that was put up later of Isabel smashing shit in the mountains. And it said, nothing better than, what did it say? God, it was after a bad day, there's nothing better than smashing stuff in the mountains with your dad. And I remember just feeling like punched in the gut, and feeling like I wasn't there for her, and feeling like that was my job, and feeling protective, and all of those things that come up. And those are all fine. Like, those feelings are valid, right? You can have those feelings. But at the end of the day, the most important feeling to have is just that love for your kid, and realizing, you know what, like, at least somebody was there. Maybe you were busy working. Maybe you weren't in town. Maybe you weren't the one that she needed right then. And so somebody was there. And so as the dad, that's what I have to own, and that's what I have to feel. And it's a hard thing to do. It's something that I'm still learning how to do, but we've had really hard challenges come up in our family unit that the parents have had to come together to deal with.
Yeah.
And the only way to get through those moments is to realize that it isn't about you. It isn't about any particular parent. It's about that child. And everybody that's at that table has love for that child. And that's the only thing that fucking matters.
Yeah. Did you, going a little deeper, did you ever feel less as a father when you saw that, you know, Hillary was remarried to a man that she obviously loved and had a loving relationship, and parenting Isabel and Rockwell, and, you know, we've openly discussed this. There were times where you were, you know, single, unhealthily so at times. Did you ever feel less of a father because you didn't have the unit or the unit of family that they had? Did it make you feel less at times of like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
And how did that affect you mentally? Like, where did that mentally take you?
I think not being able to, what's the best way to answer this? Kids are attracted to stability, and kids want to be in safety. Mm-hmm. They want to be in an environment that feels safe to them. And so post-divorce, I moved back here to Utah in 2017. And since then, I've been in 3 serious relationships. And I say serious relationships because they're relationships where my kids were introduced to the relationship. And the first 2 were unhealthy relationships. And there were parts of those relationships where things felt safe, things felt good, and the kids were attracted and they wanted to be there. And then as they would kind of devolve and go down an unhealthy path, you could tell that the kids were not happy and that they didn't want to be there. And when those relationships ended, those are probably some of the darkest times in my life, because you've not only ended a relationship that was important to you, but you feel like you've let your kids down again, and you feel like you've put them through almost another divorce. One of the hardest times in my life, if not the hardest time in my life, was a year and a half ago, ending a relationship where we had lived together for 3 years, and my daughter was very close to this woman's daughters, and it was like a whole other divorce, and it put all of our relationships into a tailspin. I had to regain and rebuild a relationship with my daughter who felt betrayed again. I had to rebuild a relationship with my son. But all of that happened by realizing that I needed to really rebuild the most important relationship, and that was my relationship with me. And so now I'm in the third serious relationship I've been in since I moved back here in 2017. And this one is it. This one is different, and this one will stick because I've fixed that relationship with me before anything else.
Yeah. What, and I for those listening, you and I have a beautiful relationship. We met probably 18 months ago through We Are the They. We were forced together into a bedroom in Moab, which who misses, but we were forced into we were forced into a bedroom where we had to become vulnerable with each other and share a list of things that we loved about ourselves and didn't love about ourselves. And we just had this beautiful relationship blossom. And I didn't know you, you didn't know me, and we were forced into a bedroom and we clicked and we became accountability partners for 3 months, and we talked about a lot of dark things in both of our lives, and we've both seen the beautiful growth in each other and the growth of loving ourselves, which is mightily important and has completely changed the dynamic of our lives and our personal lives and our family lives. Going through that growth and loving Nick, and one of the things I love about you is you have a tattoo on your bicep that says "It's good to be Nick," as a gentle reminder that it is actually really freaking good to be Nick.
It is. You should try it.
Being Nick, if only I had that hair, my friend. That's
whatever. It's good to be Matt. That's the whole damn point.
It's really easy to wash this hair, I'm telling you. What was some of the, I will call them safety precautions, but some of the steps that you put in place, meeting and falling in love with Haley? What are some of the steps that you put into place to protect Isabel and Rockwell this time round, knowing that, the dissolvement of your relationship with your ex caused such catastrophic pain to them and a dissolution of the relationship? What things do you put in place this time?
First and foremost, it was honesty between Haley and I, and transparency. I'm trying to think of the first time that she met either of my kids, because it doesn't stand out, which I think is significant. It doesn't stand out because it kind of it flowed very, very naturally this time. It wasn't like this thing that we had to arrange and decide, okay, now we're going to meet the kids and here we go. And I remember talking to both of my children before introducing her to either of them and telling them about this person that I was dating and that I was seeing and that I really cared a lot about. And it hasn't been perfect. And I think very predictably so. With Rockwell, he struggled with the last relationship that I had, and so he is thrilled. He thinks Haley's amazing.
I've seen that.
And he's got this little crush on her, which is adorable. But it's also partly his age as well, right? he's 11 years old and he's more malleable to a new person coming into his life, especially somebody who he sees as like this beautiful rock star. He's like, oh, this is awesome. Isabel's a 16-year-old girl. Doesn't matter if it was Haley or, any other named individual you want to put in there. She had a hard time with the last relationship ending. And so I think she's going to have walls up around anybody who comes in. And so it's still a work in progress right now, but it's been a beautiful journey to see both of them slowly kind of accept this person. And the acceptance of Haley has, at least right now, very little to do with Haley. And it has to do with them seeing that dad's okay. Dad's happy and we're safe. And I think as the more that they see that, the more that they're going to want to get to know her and want to love her and want to accept her. And that's kind of where we're at right now, is they keep on seeing that. Every interaction is another chance to see that dad's happy, dad's safe, dad's okay. Okay, this is all right.
Yeah. Did you take, because there's I'm sure, out of my 5 listeners, there may be one person that can resonate with this. Did you take the time to sit down with Rockwell and Isabel and show them and talk to them about the progress that you've made with you prior to getting into the relationship with Haley and saying, this isn't like before? I know who Nick is. I've worked through Nick's trauma. I'm in a very good place to make a sensible decision about a relationship, and I need you to trust me that this is not like before.
Yes. It's been a hard well, not a hard conversation. It's difficult to emphasize it's difficult to impress the importance of what that work has been for me to them, right? If I try to explain the importance of my tattoo to my kids, they're kind of like, oh, that's cool, Dad.
Yeah.
And because they've never had an existential crisis. They've never been in a position where they felt like they were rock bottom. And so, yes, that conversation has absolutely happened. But I think as children, the best way for them to learn is just by seeing.
Yeah.
And so for them to see me happy and to see me doing well, both in a physically healthy manner and a mentally healthy manner, that just builds on them being like, okay, we're good.
Yeah. Dad's
good. Dad's safe. This is safe.
Yeah. I've been very fortunate. I know Haley and love Haley, and her and I, we had a beautiful conversation several months ago where we were in conversation. We were talking about the commitment that you and her had made, and her wanting to level up that commitment by stepping into a co-parenting role with you to show that I'm not going anywhere, and I want the kids to see I'm not going anywhere, and we are in this for the long haul. And it was, it actually meant a lot to me and kind of cemented when this concept of starting this podcast came around, of like, I actually have something to give on this situation about being a step parent. And I remember her, talking to me about this, and one of the things we talked about was like, you just have to, and Andrew and I talked about this on our podcast actually, it was like, you just have to let the kids have time.
Yeah.
They authentically need to fall in love with you and know what your place is in the relationship. You can't force that.
Yeah.
You can't steamroll it and say, okay, well, I'm your new mom and you're going to do what I say and this is the way it's going to go. Like, you have to just let them authentically fall in love with you, fall in love with your position in the family, and you can't force it. If they don't want to fall into line, you can't draw a line in the sand and say, it's freaking happening, kids, so buckle up. It's just got to be beautifully and authentic.
Yeah.
I have honestly seen that with Haley. The interactions, when we went to Lake Powell with the families, I saw Rockwell and Haley spending, beautiful time together where he was, nestled into her and they were just watching something on the iPad and whatever. And I've seen interactions with her and Isabel as they grow. How does Haley feel about stepping into, and obviously the best person to speak to would be Haley, and I'm going to have her on the podcast and talk to her about this, but from your perspective as bringing Haley into your family, how does Haley see things progressing?
I know it's a challenge for her because I know that so what you need to, well, you know this, but what the listeners need to understand is Haley has no children of her own, has never had any children of her own, and wants no children of her own. But she loves my kids.
She does.
And so she's trying to learn how, not just like how to parent new kids, but how to parent. And so she has been just the most Haley ever. She's just her, where it's this beautiful, kind, gentle easing into it, right? Like Haley would never like scream at Isabel for not picking up her clothes or something, but rather she'll think about it. She'll consider what the best options are to help improve Isabel's cleanliness. She'll talk to me about it. Yeah. She'll wonder what her role is there and what she can do and what she can say. And then she'll find the most loving, gracious, kind approach to tell this girl, pick your fucking shit up.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense at all. But
it does. And I'm really glad that you picked up on that point, because in the podcast with Andrea and I, we were talking about, Andrea and I never had that. And in that podcast, I called it a board meeting.
Yeah.
Or that business meeting. We never had a board meeting of this is how the family's going to work. I speculated and didn't know where my boundaries were.
Yeah.
I didn't know how hard I could push as a disciplinarian, when to push, when my opinion mattered, or when I could step in. Andrea and I just figured that out. And it was almost figured out like I would do something and Andrea would pull me aside and be like, hey, that's a little harsh. Let's throttle back. I'm like, I don't know. I've never done this before.
It's brutal. I've been in a relationship where I sat and I watched this 5-year-old just scream obscenities at her mom. And I'm like, I'm not the dad. Mm-hmm. I'm not the dad. And her mom's trying to put her to bed and she's taking her upstairs. Nothing. Dragging her upstairs. Nothing. Taking her up, yelling at her, shutting the door. Nothing. And finally, we're 2 hours into this fiasco and I grab that girl by the arm, march her ass upstairs and very sternly like, this will not fly. You will stay in this room. And I pulled the light out of her room because she would just turn on the light if we put her in the room, and shut the door and left. And I'm like, nailed it. Champion.
Yeah. Got
that girl, like taught her. And it caused a fight for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Because how dare you parent my child like that? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what you were doing obviously wasn't working.
Your shit show wasn't working.
And it is such a difficult balance to maintain. And you have to have those conversations with each other before one of you reacts to one of the kids.
Yeah.
And it's got to be this is what I am willing to have, and this is what you are willing to have. And it's tough.
Yeah. Do you find yourself, and I'm sure you do, in situationally, if something happens in the house or at home, and Haley's like, "Hey, we need to address that." I'm like, "Okay, well, how would you like to address it?" And
yes, and
then go forth and address it, honey. You have my support.
Yes,
because at the end of the day, you are a partnership. Andrea and I quickly realized that, whatever she says goes, whatever I say goes, and we stand behind each other, whether right or wrong. Mm-hmm. We won't disrespect each other in front of the kids and say you're wrong to do that. Uh-huh. We'll stand behind that decision, that sentence, and then behind closed doors say, okay, let's address how that was handled. We can do better.
Yeah. And for us, it's still somewhat early. And so one of the things that we have started to do is almost, I think of it like giving Haley little tidbits, like little tasks almost. Like there will be times when I'm like, hey, I'm off to work this morning. Could you wake Rockwell up, make sure he's showered and dressed, and get him off to school? And it's this, and so it's letting go a little bit of my control as the dad, but it's also giving her some of those opportunities to step in and play that role.
Yeah.
So it'll be little things like, hey, Isabel needs to be picked up from cheer. Do you think you could handle that? And it gives her an opportunity to go do it, and also to show Isabel that she's somebody who can be trusted, relied upon, and do the things that she's supposed to do.
Yeah. I think what's also very important is, if Haley didn't feel comfortable with that, is having the safe container of saying no.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, and I think, not from personal experience, but I can almost envisage and see that if someone like you was to ask that of Haley, she's just like, oh yeah, Nick wants me to do it, I'll do it, and I'm uncomfortable, but hey, he's giving me this opportunity, I'm gonna do it. Whereas if, like I said, if you have those family board meetings or parental board meetings, that it's okay to say no. I don't feel comfortable picking Isabel up. I don't feel comfortable doing this with Rockwell. I don't feel like I'm there yet.
Yeah.
I'm not okay doing this. Yeah. And you understanding as the parent, as the father, respecting that and say, okay, I hear you, I see that, I'll figure this out another way.
Yeah. And that all starts with your own relationship, right? Mm-hmm. And we have that kind of a relationship where, like, even to take it one step further, Haley, having no kids and having not done this, has really shown me a lot, where she's been able to step in and be like, hey, maybe we do this instead, or maybe you're being a little too lenient here, or maybe you're being a little too harsh here. And she has really opened my eyes into some kinder parenting techniques that I'm just like blown away by.
Yeah. One of the, before we wrap up, and again, I feel like you're really a great person to talk to about this, being a divorcee and having kids that have a separate family and a dynamic. Oftentimes, and I've seen this with friends of ours, where they ultimately don't want to be a parent to their children. They want to be a friend. Uh-huh. They don't want to discipline or be the disciplinarian, because it's a case of, well, if I'm the asshole and I'm the one that's always telling them to pick up their room or do this or do that, they'll retract from me and go the other direction, and I've got to force to bring them back. Have you ever felt that, where it's easier to just be a friend and let it go and it's okay, we'll figure it out, versus, no, I am your goddamn dad, you will listen to me and you will heed my advice and hear my word and move forward? Have you ever struggled with that, or found yourself in that position at any time where you're like, shit up, this isn't a parenting thing, this is now a friend thing, and I gotta flip back?
I've learned this the hard way.
Oh really?
Oh yeah. I've learned this the hard way. I think a lot of it, I always draw it back to this breakup from 18 months ago, but I honestly think it goes back to my divorce. And it goes back to, and maybe even past that, maybe even just being in medical school, being in residency, being away from the kids for so long, and then having that 2-year hiatus. And there was so much of me that didn't want to be a disciplinary figure, because I just wanted to be there and love them and give them whatever they wanted, because I didn't have a lot of time to give them anything else. Yeah. And then especially after this breakup 18 months ago, Isabel and I had almost a falling out, where we didn't see each other much. Wow. She stopped coming over on her days when she was supposed to come over. And it was hard for her, and I was reverted to this kind of like Disneyland dad mentality where I was just doing whatever I could to mend our relationship. And even if that meant looking past some things that I knew needed to be disciplined. And her mom and I disconnected and we weren't on the same page. And it caused problems there. And up until just a few months ago, I had some friends who were good enough to call me out and say, you need to be better here. You are being Disneyland dad and you're recreating this relationship and letting her know you love her, which is great, but it's also time to be dad. Mm-hmm. And you're doing her a disservice by allowing some of these things to just skate by.
Yeah.
So you can love her, you can be her friend, but you also need to be her dad.
Yeah.
And I came home from that weekend like really like stricken almost. And I remember telling her like, hey, I love you. I'm here, but I'm a safe place, but I also need to be your dad. And so there's going to be some changes that you might not like at first, but I'm doing them because I love you and because it's time to be a safe place for you. And it's been beautiful. It's been good. We had a dinner last night that was this beautiful, fun little dinner, just me and her getting sushi, making fun of people in the restaurant, and talking about school and you can have that. You can have those beautiful moments, but you also need to be dad.
Yeah.
And so it's taken learning it the hard way to learn it though.
Well, and I think there's learning from failure. Mm-hmm. As long as you fail forward, mm-hmm. which I'm a big advocate of, because Jesus, I've made enough mistakes in my life that I haven't learned from, and therefore made the same mistakes again. But when she realized that, hey, if I've made a mistake and it didn't work, then I've paid the price and I don't lose the lesson.
Yeah.
So what's the lesson in this? And I think that you can still have beautiful moments of a father-daughter, father-son relationship while still being the parent and not the friend. It's a very fine line that you walk of, am I too much of a friend? Am I too much of a father? But I think ultimately you can, like you did last night, you can still have the most beautiful moments and still be dad.
Oh yeah.
And again, it's all about self-growth. You've gone through years of finding out and loving Nick, and now you've gone through the work of loving Nick as a father and showing that to the girls. So you are one of my favorite humans on the planet.
Thank you, man.
I love Isabel and Rockwell. They certainly have your sass and your comedy genius, because whenever I see Rockwell, he's got some sort of comedy line to throw at me. Isabel classifies me as a gay dad, which is great.
She is. She's excited for her dad to come to a football game soon.
Football game soon. That was a whole different story. We'll share in a different podcast. But Nick and I went to one of Isabel's games, and her friends were like, "Oh, isn't that so cute? Are those your two dads?" So Nick and I are classified as Isabel's gay dads. You are one of my favorite humans. I love you dearly for allowing me into your life and sharing your vulnerabilities and your past and your failures and being very transparent and open with me. You were there for me on one of my darkest days, which I will never forget. And I've seen the work that you've done, the progress that you've made, not only in your life as Nick, but your life as Nick as a partner and as a boyfriend and a fiancé and soon to be husband and all these sort of things, and also the progression as a father. So thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for sharing your experience with me and with my listeners and viewers. And I just absolutely love you, dude. You're one of the best.
Thank you, bro. I love you, man. I'm so happy for this podcast. You're doing good things.
Thank you, mate.
Not even gonna. You are doing good things.
I am doing good things. And listeners, if you don't know, it is good to be Nick.
It's damn good to be Nick.
It's damn good to be Nick. Thank you, dude.
Thanks, brother.